Most people think the growing year ends with summer. They tidy the beds and put the garden away until spring. They're wrong. Right now is one of the most important planting windows of the whole year. Get crops in the ground now, and you'll harvest fresh food deep into winter and again in early spring, weeks before anyone else. Let me show you the 15 to plant now. If growing your own food the way it was done before the supermarket is something you care about, take a second and subscribe before we get into it. That's all I'll ask. First, let me explain why planting now matters so much, because once you understand this, you'll never waste this window again. There are really two harvests you're planting for right now, and they're both precious. The first is the winter harvest, hardy crops that you sow now that grow through the autumn and that then stand out in the garden right through the cold. So you walk out in December and January and pick fresh food while the ground is frozen and the shops are full of tired imports. The second is the early spring harvest, crops that establish now, sit quietly through the deep winter, and then explode into growth the moment the days lengthen, giving you food weeks or even months before anything you sow in spring.
And here's the reason this matters more than almost any other planting. The hungriest time in any garden isn't winter itself, it's early spring. That long, lean stretch where your stored food is running low and nothing new is ready yet. The crops you plant now are exactly what fill that gap. This is the knowledge that separated families who ate from their garden all year from those who ate from it only in summer. Stay with me, because I'll give you all 15, and then the handful of things you must get right to carry them through the cold. Number 1 is garlic, and if you plant only one thing from this whole list, plant garlic. Here's the beautiful thing about it. Garlic actually needs the cold. It needs a spell of winter chill to trigger a single clove to split and swell into a full fat bulb. So planting it now and letting it sit through winter isn't just possible, it's exactly how garlic is meant to be grown. You take a healthy bulb, break it into individual cloves, and plant each one pointy end up, a few inches deep, a good hand's width apart. Cover it with a little mulch, and then simply leave it. It roots down now, rests through winter, and comes up in spring to give you a summer harvest of big, strong, long-storing bulbs for almost no work and no cost beyond that first bulb. Plant more than you think you need. Nobody ever regretted growing too much garlic.
And if your winters are cold, reach for a hardneck type. It's the tougher of the two, and it hands you a bonus crop in spring. The garlic scapes, those curling green flower stems you snap off and cook, a whole extra harvest most people have never even tasted. One planting now, and you're eating from it twice next year. Number 2 is onions, but a specific kind, the overwintering onions, sometimes sold as autumn planting sets or Japanese onions. These are bred to do exactly what we want. You plant them now, they root and establish, they sit through the cold, and then they race away in spring to give you an onion harvest weeks ahead of anything planted in the usual spring season. Push the little sets into well-drained soil, just below the surface, a few inches apart, with the tips barely showing. The one thing overwintering onions can't stand is sitting in cold, waterlogged ground, so give them a spot that drains, and you'll be pulling onions in early summer while everyone else is only just planting theirs. Firm the soil gently around each set so the birds can't tug them out. That's the one nuisance with autumn onions, the birds pulling up the freshly planted sets by their dry tips. So press them in well and keep an eye on them the first couple of weeks. After that, they look after themselves right through the winter. Number 3 is shallots, and this is one of the oldest tricks in the book.
Shallots have been planted this way for centuries, set out in autumn, sat through winter, harvested in early summer. And here's what makes them so rewarding. You plant one shallot and it multiplies into a whole cluster. One bulb becomes a handful. They're expensive to buy and dead easy to grow, which makes them one of the best value things you can put in the ground right now. Pound for pound, there's hardly a better return in the whole garden. A small outlay on a few bulbs this autumn becomes a generous crop next summer, and then a permanent free supply after that if you keep your own each year. Plant them just like the onion sets, pointy end up, well spaced, in ground that drains, and then leave them to it. Save a few of your best from next year's harvest to replant, and you need never buy shallots again. Number 4 is broad beans, what some people call fava beans. And this surprises people because we think of beans as a summer crop, but there are hardy varieties bred specifically for autumn sowing. Sow them now, and they germinate, grow into sturdy little plants, and sit through the winter, and then take off in spring to give you a crop far earlier than a spring sowing ever could. A row of autumn-sown broad beans is one of the very first fresh things off the garden the following year, and there's real satisfaction in that after a long winter.
There's a bonus, too. An autumn-sown bean crop often crops before the black fly that plagues spring beans even get going. So you get a cleaner, earlier harvest with less trouble. The plants stand there through the cold, quietly rooting, and the moment spring comes, they're already weeks ahead. And like all beans, they feed the soil as they grow, pulling nitrogen from the air and leaving the ground richer for the next crop. Food early and a better bed, 2 gifts from one sowing. Number 5 is peas, and specifically the hardy, round-seeded types that can handle an autumn sowing. Just like the broad beans, you sow them now, they establish as small plants, they overwinter, and they crop far earlier in spring than anything sown after the cold has passed. Give them a few twiggy sticks to scramble up, sow them in well-drained ground so the seeds don't rot in the wet, and you'll have some of the earliest fresh peas of the year. And if you've ever tasted a real pea straight from the pod, minutes after picking, you know that's a prize worth planting for months ahead. Number 6 is spinach, one of the best of all the overwintering leaves. There are tough, hardy spinach varieties that you sow now that grow into small plants before the cold and that then sit through the winter giving you pickings of fresh green leaves whenever the weather is mild enough, and then a big flush of growth in early spring.
This is proper cold season spinach, and it thrives in exactly the weather that makes summer spinach bolt and fail. That's the quiet magic of autumn planting all over. Crop after crop that struggles or sulks in the summer heat comes into its own in the cool, damp, gentle weather of the cold months. You're not fighting the season, you're working with it, growing the things that actually want the weather you're going to get. Sow it now, take the outer leaves as you need them, and you've got fresh greens right through the lean months when almost nothing else is growing. Number 7 is a green almost nobody knows anymore, and it's one of the toughest, most useful things you can grow. Corn salad, also called lamb's lettuce or mash. This little plant is astonishingly hardy. It will sit under snow, shrug off hard frost, and stay green and pickable right through the depths of winter, giving you fresh salad leaves when the idea of fresh salad seems impossible. Sow it now, thinly, and more or less forget it. It asks for almost nothing. And after a winter of stored and cooked food, that first bowl of fresh green leaves picked from under the snow tastes like the year beginning again. It's mild and nutty, nothing like the bitterness you'd expect from a winter leaf, and it will often self-seed and come back on its own year after year once you've grown it, tucking itself into corners of the garden and appearing every winter without being asked.
For the sheer ratio of reward to effort, corn salad is hard to beat. Number 8 is kale, the king of winter greens, and this is the one that carries a garden through the cold. Kale sown now grows into sturdy plants before winter, and then simply stands there through the whole cold season, offering leaves when nearly everything else has died back. Pick from the bottom up, taking the lower leaves and letting the plant keep growing from the top, and one plant becomes a steady supply for months. And here's the old-timer secret. Kale gets better after a frost. The cold turns some of its starches to sugar, so the winter leaves are actually sweeter than the autumn ones. A row of kale is the single most reliable winter vegetable there is. Number 9 is chard, Swiss chard, or leaf beet, the tough cousin of spinach that keeps going when spinach gives up. Sown now, chard establishes before winter, and in all but the harshest climates, keeps offering its leaves through the cold, then bursts back with fresh growth in spring. It gives you 2 vegetables in one, the leaves cooked like spinach, and the thick stems cooked like a vegetable in their own right. And it's tough enough to shrug off cold that flattens softer greens. A few chard plants are a genuine backbone for the winter and early spring kitchen. Number 10 is the hardy winter lettuces, because yes, you can have fresh lettuce in the cold months if you plant the right kinds now.
There are specific winter hardy lettuce varieties, bred to withstand cold that would kill an ordinary summer lettuce. Sow them now, and they'll give you fresh salad leaves through mild spells in winter and a strong early crop in spring. In colder areas, a simple cover, a cloche, a cold frame, even a bit of fleece makes all the difference. And we'll come back to that, but the crop itself is one most people never realize they can grow. Number 11 is a whole group of fast, hardy leafy greens from the cabbage family. The Asian greens, like mizuna, mustard greens, and winter-hardy pak choy, along with rocket, also called arugula. These are the quick wins of autumn planting. They germinate fast, they grow quickly in the cooling weather, and many of them are tough enough to give you pickings well into the cold and then again in spring. They're peppery, fresh, and productive, and a pot or a row of them sown now fills the gap while the slower crops establish.
Sow a pinch now, and you'll be eating within weeks, not months. Number 12 is spring cabbage, and this is old, canny gardener's knowledge. You sow certain cabbage varieties now in late summer. They grow into small plants. They overwinter as those small plants, and then they heart up in spring to give you fresh cabbage in that hungriest gap of the year, long before spring-sown cabbages are ready.
It's a crop that asks for patience. It sits through the whole winter looking like it's doing nothing, but the reward is a solid, fresh cabbage right when your winter stores are running out and nothing else is ready. That timing is everything. A fresh cabbage in early spring, when you've eaten the last of the stored roots and the new season hasn't started, is worth more than a dozen in the summer glut. It's a crop that pays you back precisely when you need it most, which is exactly the kind of quiet planning the old gardeners built their whole year around. Number 13 is turnips, and this is one people forget can go in this late. Fast-maturing turnips sown now in the cooling soil will give you a crop of tender roots before or during the early winter, and the tops, the turnip greens, are a fine cooked vegetable in their own right, which means you get two foods from one sowing. They're quick, they're hardy, and they thrive in the cool, damp weather of autumn that so many summer crops hate. Sow them now for a crop that fills the bridge between summer and the deep cold. Pull them small and young when they're sweet and tender, rather than leaving them to grow large and woody. A young turnip is a genuinely fine vegetable, a world away from the tough old things that give the turnip its poor reputation.
And in milder areas, a mulch of straw over the row lets you leave them in the ground and lift them as you need them well into the winter, the earth itself keeping them fresh. Number 14 isn't a crop to harvest at all. It's a crop that heals your soil over winter, and the old gardeners swore by it. Green manures, also called cover crops. Instead of leaving a bed bare all winter, where the rain washes the goodness out of it and weeds move in, you sow a quick-growing crop like field beans, clover, rye, or vetch, purely to cover and protect the ground. You don't eat it. It grows over winter, holding the soil together and stopping the nutrients washing away. And then in spring you dig it in, and it feeds the soil for the coming year. An empty winter bed is a bed losing fertility. A bed under a green manure is a bed getting richer. It's one of the smartest things you can do with any ground you're not otherwise planting. Think of it as feeding the soil for free while you sleep. The roots hold the earth together against the winter rains. Some of these crops even pull nitrogen from the air the way beans do. And when you turn the whole lot in come spring, you're handing next year's vegetables a bed full of fresh fertility that cost you nothing but a handful of seed. The old gardeners never looked at a bedded bed and saw rest. They saw waste, and they sowed it.
And number 15 is a technique more than a single crop, and it's the one that quietly doubles what this whole list can give you. Sow in succession and use a little protection. Don't sow everything at once. Sow a short row of your greens now, and another in 2 or 3 weeks, and another after that, so you have crops at different stages coming along, rather than everything ready and then gone. And give the tender ones a little shelter, a cloche, a cold frame, a low tunnel, even a sheet of fleece thrown over on the hard nights. That thin layer of protection can lift your garden a whole climate zone, turning "it died" into "it thrived," and stretching your fresh pickings weeks longer at both ends of the winter. Succession and shelter, that's how the old gardeners ate fresh in every month there was. It's the difference between a single feast and a steady supply. Anyone can grow a glut. The real skill, the thing that actually kept a family fed, was spreading that harvest out so there was always something ready and never a week with nothing. A short row every couple of weeks, a cover for the tender things, small habits, but together they're what turn a summer hobby into a year-round larder. So those are the 15, but planting them is only half the job. There are a few things you must get right to carry these crops through the cold, and if you skip them, a hard winter can take the lot. Let me give you those now.
Quick thing first. If this is proving useful, the single best way to support this channel is to hit subscribe. It's free, and it means the next one comes straight to you. Now, getting these crops through the winter. The first thing, and the most important, is timing, which is the whole reason for this video. These crops need to get their roots down and reach a decent size before the cold really arrives and growth grinds to a halt. That's why now and not November. They don't need to be big, but they need to be established. A plant that goes into winter as a sturdy young seedling will sail through and surge away in spring. A seed sown too late goes into the cold with no roots and no size, and many simply won't make it. So the lesson is, don't wait.
If you're going to plant these, get them in now while there's still warmth in the soil and enough light in the day for them to grow. Every week you delay in these late weeks counts for more than a week in spring, because the days are shortening and the soil is cooling with each one that passes. A crop sown today has a real head start on the same crop sown a fortnight from now. That's how fast the window is closing. The second thing is drainage, because in winter it isn't the cold that kills most crops, it's the wet. A hardy plant can handle being frozen. What it can't handle is sitting in cold, waterlogged, sodden ground for weeks, because that's what makes roots and seeds rot.
So plant into ground that drains, and if your soil is heavy, plant into raised beds or mounded rows so the winter rain runs off rather than pooling around your crops. Get the drainage right and you've won half the battle before the frost even arrives. This is the single most common reason overwintered crops fail, and it's almost always blamed on the cold when the real culprit was the wet. A raised bed, a mounded row, a handful of grit worked into heavy soil, any of these lifts your crops up out of the standing water and lets them come through a winter that would rot them flat in soggy ground. If you take one practical thing from this whole video, make it this: get them up out of the wet. The third thing is protection, which we touched on, and it's worth its own moment. That layer of cover, mulch over the roots of your garlic and onions, a cloche or cold frame or fleece over your tender greens, does two huge jobs. It buffers the crop against the worst of the cold and the brutal freeze-thaw that heaves young plants out of the ground. And for the leafy crops, it keeps them growing and pickable when they'd otherwise sulk to a stop. A few inches of straw or leaf mulch and a simple cover you can throw over on the coldest nights is the difference between a garden that limps through winter and one that keeps feeding you. And the fourth thing is simply to match the crop to your climate and be realistic.
How cold your winters get decides how much you can grow unprotected and how much needs shelter. In a mild area, half this list will stand outside untouched all winter. In a hard frost area, you'll lean more on the toughest crops, the garlic, the kale, the corn salad, the mulched roots, and use covers for the rest. There's no shame in that. It's just working with what you've got, exactly as gardeners always have. Know your winter, plant to it, and protect the rest. And keep notes as you go. Which crops sailed through untouched, which ones needed a cover, which died no matter what you did. A single winter of paying attention teaches you more about your own particular garden than any video ever could, because every plot is different, and the gardener who knows their own ground is worth more than any expert who's never stood in it. 2 or 3 winters in, you'll know exactly what to plant and when, and this will all be second nature. So let me leave you with the simplest way to actually start, because a window like this is only worth anything if you act on it, and you can begin this weekend. If you do nothing else, plant garlic. It's the easiest, most rewarding, most forgiving crop on this whole list, and it practically grows itself over winter. Then, if you've got the enthusiasm, add a row of kale and some corn salad for winter greens, an overwintering onion or two, and a row of broad beans for that early spring crop.
And cover any bare bed you're not using with a green manure so it comes out of winter richer than it went in. Start with those, get them in while the soil is still warm, and you've set your garden up to feed you right through the cold. Because here's the truth at the heart of all this. Most people put their garden to bed in autumn and don't think about it again until spring, and they go the whole winter buying every scrap of food they eat. But the gardeners who know this secret are out there right now, in the last warmth of the year, planting the crops that will feed them first, while everyone else waits. This isn't the end of the growing year. For these crops, it's the beginning. An empty bed in autumn is a harvest you're giving up in winter and spring, and it costs you almost nothing to claim it instead. Next week, I'll be back with another old skill worth having. Until then, thanks for staying to the end. Now go get that garlic in the ground.